welcome to Global Business, coming to you live from Nairobi. I am Peninah Karibe. Wherever you're joining us from, welcome to the show. Let's begin with a look at the market. South African stocks seem to be heading for the best weekly rally since January 11th. The JSE All-Share Index has added 2.1% in the past 5 days, with its 50-day moving average looking to cross above the 100-day mean. That's made equities look resilient, even as a crisis at Eskom fuels a sell-off in rand and government bonds. The All-Share ended the week 0.81% higher. Coming up on the show tonight, President Donald Trump to use emergency powers to build a wall on the U.S. border with Mexico. We'll be looking at Nigeria's leading presidential candidates and their economic policies. And a Ghanaian university student creates unique furniture from old tires. We begin the bulletin in the United States, where U.S. President Donald Trump says he will declare a state of emergency to fulfill his pledge to construct a border wall along the U.S.-Mexico border. He plans to use executive powers to bypass Congress, which allocated him less money than he had demanded. If it goes through, this plan will see billions of dollars siphoned from federal military construction and counter-drug efforts for the wall. The move is already drawing criticism from different quarters. Democrats have already termed it as misuse of power. However, it seems like Trump is not deterred.
Today I'm announcing several critical actions that my administration has taken to confront a problem that we have right here at home. We fight wars that are 6,000 miles away, wars that we should have never been in many cases, but we don't control our own border. So we're going to confront the national security crisis on our southern border.
Nathan King has been following these developments for us. He joins us live from Washington. Nathan, how did President Trump justify the use of his emergency powers to get funding for this wall?
Well, it's quite incredible. We're back to almost the opening days of the Trump presidency with alternative facts. He always states that drugs are pouring in through the southern border, that illegal immigration is at all-time highs, human trafficking. Remember the sort of Mexico rapist line that he actually announced on his first day that he was running for office, and essentially it's the same trope. The problem is that people have been analysing the figures, and generally there don't seem to be a crisis at the border compared to previous decades. Illegal immigration numbers are actually down, drug seizures are down, and crimes committed by illegal immigrants are actually lower than they are by regular U.S. citizens. So there's this sort of alternative facts universe going on. But that is basically why he's justifying it, that he couldn't get the money he needed for this wall, and only a wall will work, he said. And so therefore he'll take the $1.345 billion that Congress finally negotiated in the last 24 hours, but he's looking for $8 billion from funds that have already been allocated to other projects, which he will divert, is the word that the White House is using, into building the wall. So that's the justification. The question is, will it work?
Okay, so will it work? But Nathan, how have Democrats responded to this?
Well, I mean, Democrats, I think, personally, they feel that they won a victory. Remember, this process started a couple of years ago when he first came into office and asked for $25 billion to build the wall on the southern border with Mexico. Build that wall was a chant at every election rally, as you remember. Remember, Mexico was actually going to pay for it. When Mexico said no, the U.S. taxpayer was kind of brought in to pay for it. $25 billion basically has gone all the way down to $1.345 billion. That is a victory for the Democrats, because the $1.345 billion is actually not just for the wall, it's for border security generally. And they put restrictions on where any of these walls or fences can be built. So it's even with this emergency, it's going to be very difficult for the U.S. president to deliver. And also, you know, Democrats have seen public opinion. They know most of the U.S. polls are against building a wall. There is this feeling that is morally wrong as well, which is what the Democrats are saying. But they haven't gloat. They haven't been gloating. One newspaper article said they didn't want to gloat just in case the president changes minds or becomes vindictive. One quote in the paper this morning in the Washington Post was, "Don't poke the bear," and the Democrats are trying to make sure that they don't do that.
Okay, so Nathan, you mentioned that the polls indicate a majority are against the construction of that wall. But here's the thing. Trump said they're going to confront the national security crisis on the border. Is there a security crisis on the southern border?
Well, I mean, if you listen to President Trump, it's the worst crisis you can imagine. If you look at the figures, independent figures and also figures from the Department of Homeland Security, which has a lot of responsibility on the border, and other U.S. agencies, they're not so much. As I mentioned some figures earlier on in my answer. The thing is, can he do this? And the answer may be answered in the courts. In a background call I was on with a lot of other reporters from the White House before the US president made a speech in the Rose Garden, they were saying, look, these emergency powers have been invoked over 50 times since 1976 when this provision was brought in. This is not this is normal practice. We can divert the money if we can. There is likely to be court challenges. The Democrats haven't indicated whether they will actually challenge it or not, but it could be held up by a variety of different bodies as well. So I have to work out. But, you know, the message politically is very much for the president that the wall works. He feels, and he's got some justification in this, that he was elected president partly on his concerns about immigration, and he's sticking with it. He even admitted in his Rose Garden speech just a couple of hours ago, saying, look, I didn't need to do this, suggesting perhaps it's not an emergency, but he's looking towards 2020, which of course is his re-election. If he can say, for example, finish that wall, which is a phrase the White House has been coming out with in the last couple of days, to run for re-election, that might be something that really hits his base hard and galvanizes Republican support around him as he faces a Democratic challenger.
Okay, so Congress refused to pay for the wall in the bill. Now Trump has bypassed Congress to get those funds. And Nathan, there are a lot of Republicans in the Senate and in the House very uneasy with what Trump is doing. What kind of situation does all of this present for the president going forward?
Right. I mean, you know, most people know this, but it's worth reiterating because of this crisis. In the U.S. political system, Congress, and that means the House of Representatives and the Senate, control the cash. So essentially what the US president is asking his Republican colleagues to do in the Senate, where they hold a majority, is to basically give up their authority to control that cash and tell the country where it's going, and give the president authority to basically move the cash around that they've appropriated for other things. For example, the president is taking money out of an anti-narcotics budget, Department of Defense construction budgets, moving it around. That's something that Congress allocated for the people of the United States to spend. That's not something the president normally does. And so, therefore, the US president is essentially saying to the Senate, you have to vote yourself less powers in the future. And other Republicans have said, look, even if we do this once, what's to stop a Democrat from coming in as president and saying, well, what about this national emergency, like gun crime? What about this national emergency, like climate change? This sets a precedent for the expansion of presidential power going forward at the expense of the Congress. So Republican lawmakers, understandably, are a bit nervous about it.
All right, Nathan King, live there in Washington. Many thanks. Now, on Saturday, millions of eligible voters in Nigeria will head to the polls to elect the next president and members of the National Assembly. There are nearly 80 candidates competing for the country's top job, but the contest can be boiled down to be mainly between the incumbent president, Muhammadu Buhari, and the former vice president, Atiku Abubakar. The country's economy is one of crucial issues voters are hoping the next leader will tackle. Let's take a closer look at the two leading candidates and their economic policies. Deji Badmas is live for us in Lagos. So Deji, these two main candidates have come up with over-the-top policy documents. Buhari calls his the next level. Abu Bakar is calling his let's get Nigeria working again. But what does the presidency of each of these candidates really mean for the economy? What are the core differences of each one of them in regards to reviving and strengthening the economy?
Peninah, look, the names of the documents, wonderful, no doubt. President Buhari, of course, calling his own the next level, and Atiku Abubakar saying the Atiku's plan. I have read both documents in detail, and I have heard both candidates now speak about their economic plans. To be candid, if you ask me, I would tell you that there is fundamentally, and that's the underlying word there, fundamentally, there's no difference as such between both documents, the economic policies of both candidates. I would say fundamentally no different. Sometimes you're reading Atiku's plan, you begin to feel like you're reading the next level document. So fundamentally, I would say no difference. But one thing we do know for sure is that while President Buhari is projecting himself as pro-poor, while Atiku Abubakar is being projected as, pro-elite and pro-private sector. For instance, he said he's going to sell all public enterprises like the NNPC just to generate funds to use to turn the economy around. Buhari, of course, has been silent on that. Buhari, that we know, for instance, would not be too open to selling the NNPC. Atiku has said he's going to get the private sector to play a central role, to help turn the economy around. The same thing that President Buhari has said. As a matter of fact, we saw President Buhari just a few weeks ago, sign executive number 7, basically granting tax holidays now to private companies now that would help to construct roads in this country. So you look at their documents, to be candid, fundamentally, I would say no basic difference, but both candidates are projecting themselves in two different lights. As I said, President Buhari pro-poor and Atiku Abubakar somewhat pro-elite, if you like.
Okay, so Deji, both documents, again, extremely ambitious, some critics even calling them unrealistic in their spending plans. Abu Bakar, for instance, has these grand plans for infrastructure spending, about $90 billion a year. But how exactly are they going to achieve their projected objectives? Do they have a clear plan of doing so in their manifestos?
And that's one of the reasons why Abubakar, for instance, has said he intends to privatize ailing public enterprises now, like the NNPC. He says he hopes to use that now to generate funds. But the irony of it all is that, look, the current government, as a matter of fact, is also talking about that. At some point, he was planning to sell the NNPC and sell off its stake in one of the major gas projects in this country. So you're quite right. How to raise the money, they've been short on that. They've not been able to provide any convincing explanation at all on how to raise that money. For instance, Abubakar says he's going to grow the GDP of this country to astronomical level by 2025. But when you look at those plans and details, you just do not see the how. That's what you don't see. You see the plan, but you don't see the how they intend to achieve some of these grandiose plans, if you like. It's the same thing with the president's document. So you're absolutely right. And for those critics who have said, look, that some of the items contained in these documents are not realistic, I would tend to agree with them, because the documents basically, you look at most of the policies there, they are basically, as I said, short on the how to raise the money. For instance, Nigeria is having to deal with the drop in oil price, crude oil production is coming down. So how do you raise the money? We're trying to diversify the economy, but you still need oil money to be able to diversify the economy. So these are challenges, and that's the reason why most times these politicians make promises, and then when they come in, they find it difficult to implement, and they end up coming up with excuses. So it's up to the electorate now to really understand and, you know, try to be realistic with some of these, well, very ambitious plans, if you ask me.
All right. And of course, they will make that decision tomorrow. Deji, as always, a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you. Deji Badmas, live there in Lagos. Coming up next, a look at your corporate headlines. The Chief Executive Officer of Telecoms Group MTN Uganda, Will Van Put, has been deported from the East African country over national security concerns. The firm has appointed Gordian Chomukama as acting chief executive. The development is the latest headache for the largest telecommunications firm in the country after 3 senior executives were deported last month. Nigeria has received a donation of $1 million for the improvement of information and communication technology in the country. The donation was made by Huawei Technologies Company Nigeria Limited to Digital Bridge Institute. The funds will also be used to promote innovative ideas and research that will contribute to the country's development. U.S. investment bank JP Morgan has created a cryptocurrency to help settle payments between clients in its wholesale payment business. JPM Coin is the first digital currency to be backed by a major U.S. bank. The investment bank says it sees potential in using digital coins to reduce risk and enable instant transfers. And Amazon has announced it will not build a new headquarters in New York, citing fierce opposition from state and local politicians. City and state leaders had agreed to provide about $3 billion in incentives to secure that investment, which angered local unions. The dramatic turnabout comes just months after the firm named New York City as one of 2 sites selected for major expansion over the next decades. More details on this will follow a little later on the show. And let's look at your top corporate news. You're watching Global Business. Coming up after the break. Zimbabwe's annual inflation surges to 56.9% in January. And rhino poaching records a slight decline in South Africa.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business. Only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head out now.
Beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest minds in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows South Africa like we do. CGTN, TV difference.
Zimbabwe Zimbabwe's annual inflation rate has hit its highest level in a decade, surging from 42% in December to 56.9% in January. According to the National Statistics Agency, this latest increase was spurred by a rise in the price of basic goods and beer. Prices have been going up as local bond notes and electronic money loses value against scarce US dollars. Bread, a national staple, has gone up from around $1.40 per loaf to $2.50 in some shops, as bakers say they aren't getting enough foreign currency to import flour. Zimstat says the month-on-month inflation stood at 12.8%, gaining 3.82 percentage points on the December 2018 rate of 9%. Food and non-alcoholic beverages inflation, prone to transitory shocks, stood at 63.7% year-on-year, while the non-food inflation rate was 53.6%. Staying in Zimbabwe, at least 23 miners are feared dead after 2 mines collapsed. Around 40 miners remain trapped. The victims accessed the mine illegally through a sealed shaft. The mines flooded after shafts and tunnels collapsed.
Heavy rain, collapsed shafts and tunnels led to these 2 mines collapsing. Located on the outskirts of Kadoma, Zimbabwe, the mines flooded with water. The incident has left several miners trapped. The miners are stuck 50 meters underground, making rescue efforts difficult.
Our small-scale miners were visiting their job yesterday, probably yesterday, early hours in the morning, and there was a sort of a flash flood where the underground tunnels were flooded. Water, quite a huge amount of water came from the top and flooded into the shafts. And so being trapped, a lot of our brothers and sisters down there, they were unable to escape. So right now we pin our hopes on God, but as it seems, we may have lost, if not most people, everyone.
Family members surround the site hoping to locate their loved ones. Among them is Kezia's son and nephew. They are part of the artisanal miners who operate illegally. Illegal mining is a concern in Zimbabwe as miners often don't follow proper procedures. But Kezias is only worried about how he will care for his son's children.
I am old and no longer able to work. These relatives were taking care of me, and I don't know what to do now.
In the absence of heavy machinery or experts from the government, fellow artisanal miners led the operation to pump out water. They used small diesel-powered water pumps offered by a small-scale miner with operations nearby.
So far, there is no help from authorities. We are using our own resources to try and rescue our colleagues.
Small-scale gold producers, including illegal miners, produced nearly 60% of Zimbabwe's gold last year. For now, though, rescuers are pumping water and hoping to save the lives of those trapped below. Wilkisanyabo, CGTN.
In Kenya, the annual Timeless Women's Conference turns 5 this year at the Kenyatta International Convention Center. This year's theme is Liberating Africa, which has brought together what has now become a network of timeless women of wonder. The conference aims to shift the narrative of what women can do, who they are, mentorship and shared experiences, among others. The TWC platform is unique in its involvement of men as key stakeholders to build bridges for and with women. Helen Munyeki is the CEO of Timeless Women of Wonder, and she joins us here in studio for a further discussion on this. Thank you very much for joining us. So the Timeless Women's Conference, turning 5 this year, what are some of the gains you've made?
It's amazing. We brought a network of leaders. Some of our sub-themes have been looking at the potential Africa has to create a strong position on the global platform. So we were having a key focus of moving from local to global, shifting the narrative of Africa, and as well as moving from consumption to production. Africa must become producers, not just consumers. So those are some of the highlights. When you look at women, it's a platform for women, working in partnership and close collaboration with men. Yeah. One of the things you realize is so important for women in leadership and women in business is access to market, access to information, access to resources and finances that will help women to move to that next level. And so this is a key highlight as well for the past 3 days.
Okay, so you've taken the words right out of my mouth. Access to credits, to resources, to finance. We've talked about necessary legislation. Is that enough? And how much progress have we made on that front?
Yeah, I think when you look at different countries in Africa, we're at different points, and we've made some good progress, but not enough, because we're looking at a primarily male-dominated influence, especially in business and in leadership, than it is for men. That's just the way it was set up. I mean, when you look at most of the political and governance structures that exist today, they were set up in the 16th, 15th, 16th, 17th century. And if you look at what men and women were doing at that time, women were predominantly homemakers, and men were predominantly in the marketplace. So systems were created really to support the players of the marketplace, which were predominantly men. A lot of those systems have not changed much, because, you know, it takes a lot of years to build structures and systems. And so you find that women are coming into leadership, into business, into the marketplace against the odds, you know, fighting against a system that does not necessarily favor them from the onset. So I think it takes much more effort for women to succeed. And indeed, some legislation work has really gone into this to make it a bit easier for women to succeed. There's still so much more work to be done, for sure. We have to have legislation. We have to have practical strategies and initiatives that trickle down to the ground that will enable women to do these things.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's a shame, really, when you think about it, because women, it's no secret, are more entrepreneurial than the men. A lot of societies are supported by the women, but then their successes are very understated. How are you changing this narrative?
You're so right. I mean, you know, when we look at the context of Africa and even other parts of the world, I've spoken to a lot of women. You know, within the Women Network, we have a lot of stakeholders and networks and linkages that's global. And when I talk to women in different spheres of influence, locally, you know, regionally, and also globally, you find that there are certain similarities across the different spheres. And you find that some of the challenges that women face in leadership and in business and in politics are quite similar, just context is different. And when you look at understating, you know, it's sometimes systems and culture that plays a role in that, but sometimes it's also the women themselves. You know, women are held to higher moral standards, and so there's a high expectation naturally for women. And so women are always trying to play, you know, at a higher level of excellence, of moral value and everything. And so they judge themselves sometimes more harshly. And so also the modesty that women come with, most women feel like if they presented a lot of their success, that they're not going to be modest. So they really downplay that and expect people to read into their successes or read into their minds to speak for them. So you find that generally, you know, whether it is from outside, externally, or internally in a woman's life, they tend to really downplay a lot of the successes that they are making. And one of the things that we need to do, and we are doing, is actually focusing on mindsets, transforming mindsets, building confidence, and the ability to articulate, still in a modest way, you know, factual successes that women have built. And through our mentorship program, you know, across Africa, we have a mentorship program where we actually equip women in various spheres of leadership, business, politics, corporate, and development, on ways that they will unlock, you know, their leadership to the high level of impact, of influence, and of net worth. And primarily is just, you know, looking at the strategic mind. That's a big mind. You know, men naturally are very risky. They dream big. But women, you know, are cautious, so they limit their thinking in terms of their dreams. So we open that up and allow them to dream big. We actually look at building confidence, because confidence gives them the ability to be, self-aware, confident of who they are, and which in turn allows them to articulate that in this marketplace.
Now, one of the many World Bank reports indicated that one of the challenges women face is a lack of support network. Now, what I noticed was unique to you is the fact that you're using men to build bridges for the women. How is that working out?
It's the best strategy ever. I mean, in our platform, we have 7 pillars, and 1 pillar is completely dedicated to men. And we call that pillar Men Building Bridges with and for women. Now, when you look at Africa and really other parts of the world, Africa is a bit unique because it's a context. Asia, quite similar. You find that we are very cultural, very spiritual, and we also are very political. Okay, so when you look at the leadership platform, most of the political leaders within the developing nations, because they have strong culture, are men. Most of the religious leaders are men. Most of the business leaders, or where resources are held, it's held in the hands of men. Most of the political leaders are men. So if you're talking about women's empowerment, and indeed, if you're going to unlock opportunities for women to create wealth and contribute to our development across the globe, you will find that you cannot do that and achieve great milestones, not little milestones. We want to achieve great milestones. You have to do it in partnership with those guys who are the keys, and that's the men. So in Timeless, what we have done, and you will see even in our platform, even in the just concluded conference, men are in the center of everything. Why? Because men look at things in terms of value and outcome and impact, and if they can see value in business sense, they will support it. And so we present the idea of a collective shared prosperity. We need both genders, both players inside the game to succeed much faster, much quicker. And it saves you time, effort, and money to do that. And the successes are so big. And then when men understand the importance of why women need to be in business, in politics, they open the doors. Board positions start to give room for women. When you tell men that this woman on your board is representing your largest consumer base, the consumer decision, the mind of your largest consumer, and the driver of consumer decision, they see it, they open the door. And that door opened is a door for women, and a door for the whole other generation of women. When you're looking at peace and conflict across the globe, you're looking at women looking at a different perspective on war. Normal lives should be killed, and men looking at war in terms of how many heads are cut off and the victory. And so women coming into conflict and peace resolution is also a very important thing. So we have seen a lot of gains and a lot of successes and impact with having men in this conversation. There is a narrative that I personally do not encourage. And in our platform, in our network, we actually base this is anything a man can do, a woman can do better. Because then that brings unhealthy competition, and the doors are locked. So in Timeless, in the network, in the platform, we actually say we are both different, yet we are similar in some ways, and we just need to work together to win bigger. And that opens the doors for women. All right. Yes. I'm afraid we have to leave it there. We could go on forever. But thank you very much, Nyakan, for joining us. In studio with us, Nyakan Munyeki, CEO of Timeless Women of Wonder. Now, Africa's foreign partners in the health sector are supporting the continent's strong call for its private sector to invest in the health sector. Gavi, the vaccine alliance that works in over 30 countries in Africa to assist with immunization, says this is evidence that the continent is working to eliminate neglected tropical diseases. Chief Executive Officer of the Gavi Vaccine Alliance said Barclays spoke to CGTN Coletta Wanjohi in Addis Ababa.
We need to, first of all, provide prevention. We need to have cost-effective interventions. We then need to invest in primary health care, which can deal with 70 or 80% of the conditions. And only then do we have a health system that can afford to be able to provide, extensive care for people beyond that. So there was a lot of discussion here that had to do with more money for health, which is absolutely necessary, but we also need more health for the money.
In terms of accountability in your operations in Africa, how are you doing that? Because we've seen cases previously of governments being accused of misusing the Gavi funds.
Well, it's very important, since we are supported by private sector countries, including China. We want to make sure that taxpayers' resources are protected. So the first thing we do, obviously, is try to make sure there are strong systems. Now, of course, we work in some of the most difficult countries in the world, often in fragile situations. And so when resources are misused, which does happen from time to time, we want to make sure those resources are repaid. We have a repayment rate that is well north of 99%. So we're able to say to our donors that if money is misused, we get it back. But the other thing that's really important is we work with countries to strengthen their systems, particularly if there is misuse. If you just turn around and leave those countries, what we have to do is make sure the people who made that misuse are prosecuted, but then that the country works to improve their systems, not just for Gavi resources, but for their own national resources, because obviously in poor countries we need to make sure that every penny, every shilling is used for the intended purposes of its population.
We are also seeing a stronger call for the private sector in the continent to invest more in the health sector, but we are also seeing a lot of skepticism.
Well, first of all, we are enthusiastic about private sector engagement. The area that we work with the private sector in is innovation. Because if you talk about trying to reach the last mile, today that often isn't the hinterlands of countries. It often is in urban slums. More than 50% of the world's population now live in urban areas, and it's also in people on the move, refugees. And to be able to reach these people, we need new technologies, take advantage of the digital revolution, take advantage of new ways for us to deliver better supply chains. And so we think there's a very important role for private sector to engage in trying to bring those technologies forward.
The African Union has dedicated 2019 to finding durable solutions to refugees and internal displacement and all this forceful displacement from people's homes. How do you think big players like Gavi can assist the continent to reach this goal?
So, I mean, if you look at the world today, there's more internally displaced people than ever in history. They're talking about now around 68 million people. So this is a real problem. One of the challenges is often these people move, and in that move, they tend not to get health services. And particularly worrisome in that circumstance is that you don't have vaccines, you don't have prevention, and this can be a source of outbreaks. And particularly if they end up in dense urban areas, those outbreaks can be explosive. Or in refugee camps, although traditionally in refugee camps they tend to come in and provide vaccination. So we've been working with host governments to provide additional vaccines for those governments to be able to help provide vaccines for the displaced people moving into them. For example, in Uganda, which is the largest home of refugees, mostly from South Sudan, we provide additional resources to be able to make sure that those people have full immunization.
Rhino poaching in South Africa has been problematic for the tourism sector in recent years. Between January and August 2017, 691 rhinos were poached in South Africa. That number came down to 508 in the same period in 2018. Anti-poaching units in the major danger zones appear to be winning the battles, and while region breeders are fighting a different battle. Here's more on that story.
They talk about the ease of doing business. When it comes to the rhino breeders, there is no ease of doing business because it seems like every impediment is put in the way to stop them from making a living.
Our interaction with the government partners has always been good. I encourage them to use this project. It's the best breeding and the best protected project in the whole world for rhinos. I encourage my regional and national government members to use it as a jewel in the crown of the country. It is an excellent breeding project, but I'm afraid they have not taken up my offers.
Anti-poaching operations take up half of the monthly and annual budget to keep these animals secure, and it's been successful.
I have had 32 rhinos poached on this project, but 30 of those rhinos were before we had our security umbrella. Our security umbrella consists of radar, day and night cameras. Since we were installing it, we've only had 2 rhinos poached 2 years ago.
There's a huge number of challenges when it comes to the breeding of rhino in captivity, and government has a role to play.
The biggest challenge to this project is not the poacher. It is actually permits. We need a permit to do everything or anything with the rhino. We need a permit, and that's our challenge. Our government is not issuing us with permits. I believe that with the correct help, in 50 and 100 years' time, we can be back to the sort of numbers we had.
Rhino breeding is an essential part of the value chain here, and if it's not looked after and nurtured by the government, for example, it's going to fade and the illegal trade is going to take over. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN, somewhere in the Northwest.
You're watching Global Business. Coming up after the break. Chinese President Xi Jinping meets US trade negotiators in Beijing. we attend a campus party in Sao Paulo with the who's who in the tech industry.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
Let's head to Beijing now. Chinese President Xi Jinping has met with the visiting U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin. Their meeting comes after another round of high-level trade talks aimed at finding a resolution to their ongoing trade dispute. According to President Xi, the two countries have common interests and are both responsible for maintaining global peace and stability. He adds that the world is advocating for China and the U.S. to have healthy and stable relations. On the trade dispute, Xi says that cooperation is the only way forward, but China will always stick to its principles. With their 3-month trade truce set to expire on the 1st of next month, the two sides are scheduled for another round of talks next week in Washington. A new no vote for Theresa May's Brexit deal in Parliament. Though mostly symbolic, the Prime Minister warned that Thursday's no vote could damage her position with the European Union. CGTN's Richard Bestick explains what's behind the government impasse.
The government had intended to appease, placing apparently conflicting ideas before Parliament as it juggles Brexit talks with Brussels.
Members need to give the government time to make good on this work, and as a House to hold our nerve. To deliver a deal that addresses the twin risks of no deal or no Brexit.
The intended message from this latest Brexit showdown, assuring Brussels everything's fine, Parliament's on side and on message, if only.
The ayes to the right, 258. The noes to the left, 303.
The sticking point, still the British border in Ireland. Beautiful, invisible, but potentially lethal. The challenge post-Brexit, finding a way to avoid a return to a hard border and possible conflict. This, the remains of a border post after an IRA bomb attack. People in Northern Ireland are fearful.
People over in England who've never been here and live here think, oh, I'll have no problems. But, you know, I think it's very delicate at the moment.
Our peace has been very hard fought for, and I think we need to fight hard for our future generations that they don't have to go through what we did.
The so-called Brexit backstop is an insurance policy against any return to a hard border, which Dublin and Brussels say is a must. In London, however, Brexit hardliners see it as a mechanism that could trap the UK inside the EU, and crashing out, even without a deal, would be better, they say.
This latest defeat for the British government is not the end of Brexit, it'll be back. However, it is a barometer of the mood in this place and the difficulties facing the UK Prime Minister Theresa May as she struggles to get Brexit over the line. As for Brussels, well, they'll be watching and wondering why should they make concessions when it's apparent, whatever they do, Theresa May isn't in full control of her own Parliament. Richard Bestick, CGTN, London.
As I mentioned a little earlier in the show, multinational technology company Amazon is abandoning plans for a headquarters in New York City after facing resistance from protesters and local politicians. This $2.5 billion plan was one of the country's biggest economic development deals. John Terrett has more.
I can tell you that the decision by Amazon not to come to New York was met with some exasperation by most people here on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. The story is that Amazon, which has its main headquarters in Seattle in the northwest of the country, was seeking a second headquarters. And there was a nationwide competition lasting more than a year in which Amazon courted pretty much every major city in the United States. In the end, it decided on Virginia, just outside Washington, D.C., and Long Island City in Queens, New York. There's also a smaller facility to be built in Tennessee in the south of the country. As for New York, no sooner had the announcement come than there were immediate protests in the borough of Queens and beyond. Locals concerned about the huge tax breaks and incentives that the mayor of New York and the governor of New York had offered to Amazon to get them to come to the city. Locals say that money could have been better spent on infrastructure like roads and the subway system. They're also concerned about gentrification for whole city blocks around the Long Island, Queens area. Then there's the cost of rents going up, which worried them. Also, many people were concerned that the 25,000 jobs Amazon was promising to bring to New York initially wouldn't be suitable for many of the local people, and that people coming into the city from outside would get them. On top of that, there was a lack of transparency, a feeling that it was never really made clear whether the huge tax breaks given to Amazon could actually be made up by the tax revenue from those 25,000 new jobs. On top of that, New York is a strong union city, and Amazon is a non-union shop. So there are two ways of looking at this. Either it's a victory for the unions and the protesters who had legitimate arguments in favor of their local environment where they live. Or you could say, well, here's New York looking a massive gift horse in the mouth. As for Amazon, I don't think it really cares. It said that it won't reopen its nationwide search for a second headquarters facility. Instead, it will concentrate its efforts on two other locations already chosen.
Another tech gathering in Brazil. More than 120,000 people are expected this week at the Sao Paulo campus party, and while plenty of university students are in attendance, don't let the name fool you. This is the country's premier tech event, among the biggest in the world, attracting entrepreneurs at all levels. CGTN's Paulo Cabral went for a visit.
For those who live and breathe technology, this is the place to be in Sao Paulo this week. It's the campus party, a big tech celebration with drones racing, fans showing off their customized computers, gaming with the latest advances, and also startups looking to present their ideas. In the Startup and Makers Pavilion, companies selected by the organizers have an opportunity to pitch their projects. This prototype of an automated food station for cattle was brought by a group of engineering students from a university in Brazil's Amazon region. It uses RFID technology to tag each animal and releases just the right amount of food to fit its individual needs.
Our teacher at the university encouraged us to look for a project that would bring innovation to our region, and we came up with this after visiting a farm. Now we are looking for investors.
We selected 200 startup companies at different levels of development. Some only have an idea, others already have some things well developed, and others yet are looking for investors for their big leap. And here we offer them mentoring and help with a business plan.
The Campus Party is Brazil's biggest tech festival. Entrepreneurship is at the heart of this event, and there is growing interest in businesses with positive social impact that also promise impressive profits.
The creator of the Diaspora.Black tourism platform was a keynote speaker at the event's Forum of Social Entrepreneurship. Carlos Humberto says his idea to create a racism-free home-sharing platform came up after he was a victim of racism when offering his place in Rio de Janeiro on traditional platforms. Almost 2 years on, his business is profitable and has hosts in 18 countries.
The value we offer our customer is not only the accommodation itself, but also the quality and the certainty that our guests and hosts, black or non-black, will not be subject to prejudice. In a country where over half of the population is black, this needs to be seen as a growing market.
This is a big party for tens of thousands of tech aficionados who come every year from all over Brazil. But it's also an opportunity to learn and share ideas that just may shape our collective future. Paulo Cabral, CGTN, São Paulo.
Let's have a look at the commodities market. Brent crude oil briefly reached 2019 highs, above $65 a barrel per day, as oil cartel OPEC-led supply cuts and the announcement of a higher-than-expected cut by Saudi Arabia this week encouraged investors. Gold rose to its highest in 2 weeks today, after weak U.S. economic data compounded concern over a global slowdown and dialed down the chances of the U.S. Federal Reserve raising interest rates this year. Still ahead on Global Business. This Ghanaian university student creates unique furniture from old tires. And we'll tell you why Zimbabwe plans to enforce $28 bicycle license fee.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
The greatest journeys. The greatest sights. The greatest adventures.
Here in Peninah, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference. Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
We head now to Ghana, where we meet a student who is giving discarded old tires a lease of life. Using fabric, glass and colored materials, Jeffrey Yeboah is not just earning a living from his unique creations, but also creating employment for other young people. Here's the story.
Agile hands and a firm sight on the final product. This is what Jeffrey Yeboah relishes in his quest to create unique designs for his clients. Yeboah uses old discarded tires, which he collects from the dump site, to create his designs. It is a self-taught skill that earns him a living, apart from sustaining him in university.
I love my job. I love what I do. It's the best thing I ever did for myself. If not for anything at all, I feel I'm part of a problem-solving community. I mean, I'm taking car tires off the streets. I'm taking car tires from gutters. I'm stopping car tires from being bent.
Yeboah uses social media to advertise his products, which he sells at between $30 and $250 US.
The only exciting part of it is that it's made in Ghana, and I want to buy it to, promote our products.
The vision for this business is big, is wide. So I look at the broader picture, not what I'm facing now. Sometimes I wake up with no money at all in my pocket. I've used every money to buy ropes, and since I'm training people, there are some material that I will do that I will never sell them because I was just training people with it and all that. So at the end of the day, I will not get anything. But nothing stops me.
He is therefore looking for more funds to expand his business, a business that rides on tires that run no more. Wilkis Anyabo, CGTN.
Let's go to Zimbabwe, where the government is looking to enforce a bicycle licensing bylaw. Cyclists in Harare are required to pay an annual fee to help maintain bike lanes, but some residents feel the charges may be beyond their financial reach. Here's more on that story.
Every morning, Tamon grabs his bike and starts his 26-kilometer journey to work. Zimbabwe is currently going through tough economic challenges. Tamon says other modes of transport are expensive to him.
If I had a choice, I would go to work with public transport because a bicycle is very risky. You can easily be involved in an accident on the highway.
Authorities are looking to address bicycle safety procedures by reactivating an annual bicycle licensing fee, first introduced in 2016. The government has renewed its efforts to implement this change in Harare. It's being argued that the funds from the license fee would help enhance safety levels for cyclists.
Municipalities used to do some licensing of some sort. They want to know maybe the number of cyclists in their town so that they properly cater for them. And also you find that in road construction, some sections of the road, they usually provide a cycle track. And that's what we traffic safety authorities recommend, that any road project should have a cyclist, that is separation of road users.
There is hope that if safety standards improve, more people could be persuaded to use bicycles. This in turn could help decongest Harare. Other cities around the world have implemented the idea of bicycle licensing or registration. The U.S. city of Honolulu requires a one-time $15 registration fee at the point of sale. Some countries, such as Switzerland, have tried to enforce bicycle licensing programs, but found the cost of administration to be too hefty. Astatal, CGTN.
Let's look at the currencies now. The Kenyan shilling was stable against the dollar today, supported by inflows from offshore investors buying government debt amid thin imported demand. South Africa's rand, on the other hand, was on course for a loss of more than 3% against the dollar this week, as 5 consecutive days of power cuts reminded investors about the fragility of an economic recovery. Let's leave it there on Global Business tonight. We welcome your feedback. Send it to the contacts on your screen and follow us on our digital media platforms. I am Peninah. Thank you for watching.